put their cameras on. I always find it more engaging if everybody has their cameras on. And I promise I won't pick on people. I promise I won't pick on people. I've already taken an oath on that with Fraser, so I won't be doing that. But I certainly will be having an interactive session. So it'd be nice to see everybody. And let me just see if I can see everyone. Yeah, I can see everybody mostly. Anyone that hasn't got their cameras on, that'd be great if they can put their cameras on. My name's Cash. I'm a director of Aston Brooks Listers. We've been working with Care England for about 16 years now. I met Martin back in 2007, and I was just saying to Fraser, it was ECHA back then. So some of you who have been members of Care England for some time will know ECHA was the previous name of Care England. And I met Martin literally by chance when something very similar to what's going on now within the industry, in the care industry, about senior carers and carer visas. At that time in 2007, senior carer visas were being refused by the Home Office. And we picked this up, and then I Googled I just did a Google and said, which is the largest care association in England? And Martin's name came up. I telephoned the office and I said, look, we've got a legal challenge here that we can do on behalf of the sector. Martin, are you happy to have a meeting? And he was, as Martin always is very amenable, he's very approachable. Had a chat with him the next day, and he said, yeah, Cash, put my name on, the ECHA's name on it as a legal challenge. And we challenged the government, the Home Office, against refusing all senior carers back in 2007 and 1. And after that, it led to transitional measures and senior carers being allowed on the shortage occupation. And then they were removed probably around 2012, 2013. And they've been off for the last 10 years. And this is relevant because this is the whole premise and why providers like to take or apply for sponsor licenses. I just want to get an idea. Is everybody that's on this webinar today, do they already hold a sponsor license, or are people looking to apply for a sponsor license? I can see nodding heads. So Louise is nodding, and Rebecca and Natalie. I can't actually see anybody else's screen at the moment. I don't know why. Zoe, have you got a sponsor license already? Helen's got one.
Sorry, Zoe is I forgot to introduce. Zoe is our policy assistant, so she's joining us for a week in work experience. So apologies, okay. I should have introduced when I first started. Apologies.
That's
for that.
All right, no worries, no worries. I mean, I mean, you're more than happy for people to just probably message in the message bar to say whether they hold a sponsor license or people looking for applying for a sponsor license. Because it does, I mean, I'll cover both areas anyway. But I mean, the whole premise of sponsor licensing started back in 2008, and it was all about self-policing. That's the main premise of the sponsor licensing. All right, I can see people are joining in and telling me whether they've got sponsor license. So the whole point of the sponsor license being self-policing is on the basis that they give a free rein. The Home Office give a free rein to providers to issue certificate of sponsorships and then get a skilled work visa, and then they come later to do an audit similar to CQC. So if majority of the people on this webinar do have a sponsor license, then my webinar will take a different turn, because I think it's important to cover providers that hold a sponsor license, what your responsibilities are, what the Home Office will look for when they come for an audit or a visit, and then subsequently how do you do your ongoing compliance. So that element of it. So what I'll do, I'll briefly touch upon how to apply for a sponsor license, and then what sort of categories they have, and I'll move very quickly on to those people that already hold a sponsor license and what we need to do thereafter. So if you're looking for a sponsor license, the process is around 8 weeks. I know providers are going to ask me 3 questions. How much does it cost? How long does it take? And what are my responsibilities? So the timeline is 8 weeks from submission, although you can put in a priority application, which is like a lottery, to be fair. It's processed within 10 working days if it gets picked up as a priority, and there's an extra £500 Home Office fee. However, generally they're around 8 weeks timeline. The Home Office fees for sponsor licenses vary. If you're a small sponsor, it's 536 Home Office fee. If it's a large sponsor, it's 1,476. And that's based on your turnover, your personal assets of the company, or the organization, and the number of employees that you have. So once they process that, they either do one of two things. Number one, they will grant you the license without what we call a pre-license visit. That's when the UK compliance officer will come down and audit your organization before giving you a license. And the other way is that a license will be granted without a visit, or they'll come down. So one of the two scenarios. And the advantage of my firm, I mean, we've been in this healthcare sector for about 16, 17 years. I've been dealing with the Home Office for over 25 years. So in specific to sponsor licensing, the sponsor licensing unit based in Sheffield, we know very well. I probably know 80% of the compliance officers that operate in the country that go out to do these visits, whether it's a pre-license or whether it's a post-license. So there are several advantages because I know who they are, and we can arrange a date and a time for them to come out and undertake the visit. So if it is someone that I know, then we will arrange a visit if it's a pre-license, and that will have to be done normally by ourselves when we go into the organization and do an audit. So we offer a free audit. We actually go into companies and then check their right to work, their HR processes, their policies and procedures when it comes to holding a sponsor license, things like that. So we undertake that on a pro bono basis, and then if there are things that can be changed, we change that and implement new policies, and then we hold the visit after we've done that. That is for pre-licensing, because obviously if you've not had a license, you may or may not know what processes to hold in place, although as part of your CQC obligation, you already have certain information and data on files anyway. So that's your pre-license process, and then how you get your license, the timelines. So I'm not going to talk a lot more about applying for a license. Going to those providers that already hold a sponsor license, as you know, the sponsor license is for 4 years, and you renew every 4 years. Whether the Home Office come and do an audit of your organization is dependent upon several due diligence that they undertake, and that could include checks with other government bodies, other businesses that you are linked with, whether the AO, which is the authorizing officer, is linked to any other businesses. So it does vary, and their remit of deciding whether they should come for a visit or not is dependent on several factors. Some of them is on compliance itself. Some of them is based on whistleblowing, where people have sort of alleged that there are illegal workers or people that have been working over the number of hours or breaching their immigration conditions. So then you have a separate audit that will take place. But generally, your post-license visits will normally be, they try to do them once a year, but since COVID, that's not really been possible. And now what I've seen recently is they're ramping up visits now, because what they've done, as everybody's aware, and I'm sure all of you on this webinar are aware, that when senior carers came on the short occupation back in 2021, and carers from February 2022, the number of license applications being submitted to the Home Office have increased exponentially. And equally, the number of applications for skilled workers on senior carers on the carer route, and obviously RGNs, but mostly carers and senior carers have increased as well. And what they've done is they've given a free rein. They've not actually had visits for the last 18 months, 2 years, not generally, not the numbers that we've seen in the past, but they have now started, after allowing providers to have the roles recruited, and they've been in those roles now for several months or maybe a year, and now they're going out to audit those organizations. Now, there's a lot of pitfalls I wanted to cover as well when it comes to auditing and what the Home Office are looking for. Now, can you just I'm just trying to see if I can see everybody. Is everybody on the webinar mostly have recruited senior carers and carers since they've had their sponsor license? The majority of people probably recruited those roles because previously they weren't available for the last 10 years. Now, one of the major parts of their compliance is if you're recruiting senior carers, especially if it's from overseas, are they actually carrying out that role? One of the key points of compliance when you hold a sponsor license is, are the migrants carrying out the roles and duties? And we've seen this in the last 12 months since I've certainly been auditing companies, is that senior carers are coming from overseas, say from Sri Lanka, India, Philippines. And what's happened is that some of them are not at the level as they thought when they come into work, because some of them are working in hospital environments and not really care home environment, unless you're from the Philippines. So they are finding actually when they come into the senior carer, but then they've changed their role to a carer and working their way up to a senior carer. So what we found recently in a lot of organizations is that the migrants are not actually carrying out the role as per their costs. And that's something that the Home Office at the moment are really clamping down on. So we need to make sure, and that's my whole point of sort of advocating this in this webinar, is the things that the Home Office will be looking for. That's one of the key ones right at the top. Are they carrying out the roles of the as per their COS? And secondly, a lot of these migrants that are coming in, whether they're in the UK or out of the UK, are carrying out job roles as carers or senior carers, but their start dates are not the exact start dates that are as per the costs. These are things that you won't be aware of. And I know a lot of people are probably going to start taking notes and stuff, but what I am going to do, and I mentioned to Fraser, we'll send a copy of the presentation to everybody that's joined this webinar, but also what I'll do, I'll prepare a paper in relation to the pitfalls and all the things that I'm covering today, and then everyone can be sent a copy of that to see this is what they're looking at. And if anybody does need a pro bono audit where we come in and have a look, and the team and my team comes in and has a look at the files on a no obligation basis, we can then highlight the stuff that we think that you need to possibly change. So delayed start dates, that's another key thing that they're looking for when they're coming in for post-license visits, if you already hold a sponsor license. And I can guarantee you there'll be people on this webinar where the dates will have to be changed, because you can never predict the exact start date on a cost when you're assigning that certificate of sponsorship for any migrant. So the delayed start dates is a key point that needs to be done and reported. The change in job role element that I made earlier, there's two ways to address that point if that's in your, if you fall into that category. The first one is we can actually report it under the license that this person has changed their job role, which will prevent them making a fresh application, because generally under the rules, if you're employing someone that's a senior carer and they're not working in that role and they're working as a carer, you have to change their role and issue a new cost and submit a new visa application. I know I'm using all these acronyms of COSs and skill work visa and things, but I presume everybody knows what a COS is, a COS, a certificate of sponsorship. Yeah, everyone nodding their heads, so that's good. So besides those two major points, the other points are specifically related to your own HR processes that you have in place. For example, how do you monitor and track visa expiry dates? Can anyone, I don't want to pick on people, so can anyone tell me how they're currently monitoring the visa expiry dates for their migrants that they're currently employing with their license? Anybody? It's not a trick question, honestly, and don't feel shy. Anybody?
We have it on our computer system. It flags up and it shows when they're expiring, and so
does that show it? Does that show it 3 months, 2 months, 1 month before? Does it have a traffic light system, or is it just?
Yeah.
And is that monitored by someone internally who monitors that aspect of the?
Our HR. We have a personnel officer who it's her responsibility. She does all the right to work checks, and she has sight of all the visas and tracks all the expiry dates. Okay, so there are two ways. Thank you, Louise. There are two ways majority of care providers are operating on the maintaining migrant, sort of monitoring the visa expiry dates, which is they're either operating an Excel spreadsheet, which is connected to the Outlook calendar, which is I wouldn't recommend that system, to be fair. I would recommend more of a HR electronic HR monitoring system, and I'll talk about that in a second. But a lot of providers are operating an Excel spreadsheet attached, linked to their Outlook calendar, so it flags up 3 to 1 month prior to the expiry. That would work if there is someone monitoring that all the time, and then it can't just be one person, it has to be centrally available. That's the reason I don't opt for that sort of process, more so on a electronic HR system, which is linked and letters are sent out to migrants automatically about your visa's about to expire in the next 3 months. Can you tell us what your, what's your plan? And that's the key thing, because one of the pitfalls when you have people that sponsored and employed under immigration control is that you will have people whose visas are expiring and they make an application and the employer is not necessarily informed of when that application was made, because there are specific rules about
people continuing their right to work if their application was submitted prior to the expiry of their visa, but it was submitted after their visa expired, then they can't work. So majority of people, i.e. migrants, will not tell you if they made an application after their leave has expired, because it will affect their right to work. And you can guarantee that no migrant's going to tell you that they haven't got the right to work. They won't volunteer that information. So it's always important to have evidence that the application has been submitted. And everything is online now since COVID. So there's no postal application. So you will get a date and time stamped application from the Home Office to that migrant that will be able to share that with you to show that their visa application or whatever application it was submitted before their leave expired. And then you can continue to employ them. And if you don't have that on file, then obviously that's a £10,000. It's normally £20,000 to be fair, but if it's the first offence, the Home Office are kind of knock 50% off and they only charge you 10,000. And if you cooperate with them, they knock another 50% off, and then you only be charged £5,000. But again, you know, that's a lot of money. And if you're a company that has many migrants, not just sponsored, I don't want people to think on this webinar that we're only talking about sponsored staff, because I can assure you, when the compliance officers come down for a visit, they are not just looking at your sponsored staff. They're looking at everybody subject to immigration control. So that will be your EU staff to make sure you've got the right share codes on the files and the correct right to work documents. They'll be looking at students specifically to make sure that you have a university letter which confirms that the term time dates are within these parameters. That letter has to be dated within the last 6 months. If it's longer than 6 months, they won't accept it. And they're not working over the 20 hours per week window of their right to work for students. And obviously they can work full-time during non-term time. So those are the main areas where the compliance officer will come in to look at. So monitoring these expiry dates, definitely on your students working over the number of hours. So they ask for the last month pay slips, maybe the last 3 months sometimes. They ask for rotas to sort of determine whether these people have been working over the hours that they should be. And everybody knows on this webinar that when it comes to home level, you know, people that need people on shift, managers that need people on shift urgently because they're short staffed, they're relying on agency heavily because of the recruitment issues currently faced by the sector. So things do go wrong. And it's not that the Home Office are here to catch you out. They do want to support you. However, if you've got things in place which are literally allowing people to work in breach of their conditions, then they'll stamp down on that. And you know, that's not something that they want to see. Certainly none of our clients want to be in that position where we go in and audit. So monitoring visa expiry is a main key area. The other key area is maintaining migrant contact details. I'm going to go through the 5 areas. So that was one of the areas. The second area is maintaining migrant contact details while you hold a sponsor license. Does anybody know why they want you to maintain migrant contact details? Anyone? Why do you think they need migrant contact details? No?
Because that person might disappear.
Yeah, that very close to exactly that. I think that was Angela, if I'm not mistaken.
It was, yeah.
It's actually, for example, if what the Home Office, the whole premise of sponsor licensing is self-policing. And the other point is, if the Home Office want to get hold of a migrant, they should be able to come to the sponsor and say, can you give us all the relevant details, contact details you have for this migrant, which is why it's a key area. You need to have their mobile number, they need to have their email address on the file, you need to have their home address, their current home address. And one other thing that they ask for that you cannot destroy is historic addresses. So one part of your obligations as a sponsor, you cannot destroy previous historic addresses that you have for any sponsored migrant. And if you do that, then that's a breach of the rules. So you should be keeping copies of their previous address as well as their current address. And the reason for that is if they are looking for that migrant for whatever reason, whether they breach condition, whether they committed a criminal offense, whatever it is, they're going to ask you for their current home address. They're also going to ask you for all the historic addresses because they could possibly be at one of those addresses, which is why they don't allow you to destroy historic addresses. And all of you will be familiar with this because if you had a post-license or a pre-license visit, the compliance officer would have mentioned these things. Do you keep historic addresses or not? And that's a key element of maintaining migrant contact details. The other areas, your recruitment practices. I presume everyone on this webinar has been trying to recruit the senior carers for some time, at least in the last 2 years, trying to reduce agency costs and get full-time staff. It's still a challenging area because you still, people, certainly our client base is still looking actively for staff in care, senior carers or carers. So although, well, does anybody know, has a resident labour market test been abolished? Or do we need to keep adverts if you hold a sponsor license? Anybody know the answer to that question? Do you all hold adverts that you recruit from your pool of candidates? Do you keep all the adverts at the moment? Yeah, people are shaking their heads saying yes, they are. I mean, since January 2021, the resident labour market test was abolished by the Home Office when the new point-based system came in. And the reason for that is because the positions that generally people are recruiting in are under the shortage occupation. Now, when you're under shortage occupation, what that means is that there's no need for the provider to advertise locally within the UK to then justify why they're recruiting from outside the UK. So they've abolished the resident labour market test. However, on post-license visits, one of the key areas of recruitment practices, the compliance officer will still say and insist that you provide evidence of how you recruited the candidate. And that includes the resident labour market test. And I've raised this with several compliance officers and said, well, if you've abolished it, why are you asking the provider to provide evidence? There's no need for it because it's been abolished. And they'll say, yes, Cash, that's right. But then how are your clients recruiting? If they're not advertising, how are they recruiting the candidates in the first place? Which is a fair point, but majority of my client base are either going via a recruitment agency, or it's word of mouth, or it's managers or administrators or existing staff working within the care home who are recommending other people, family members or friends to the home to say, look, could we, could they be offered a position as a senior care, and that's permitted under the rules now, whereas previously you had to advertise. So I would still insist that you don't have to by the book keep every single advert you've ever posted for a recruitment of a role while you've had a sponsor license since the shortage occupation came in play in January 2021. However, if you are actively advertising for the role, there's nothing wrong with keeping copies of that for your records, and then at some point we can demonstrate that to the Home Office that yes, here's copies of adverts that we've actually run. The key point that the Home Office are looking for in those adverts is a salary that you've offered. Now, does anybody know what the current senior carer rate is at the moment? Anyone? I see Kobe's on this webinar. Kobe, you should know the answer to this. You're one of my clients from back in the day.
1075.
Sorry, who was that?
1075.
1075, that's correct. It's 1075. 1075 since April this year. Prior to that, everybody will know it was £10.10. Now it is 1075. That's for your carers and senior carers. I know a lot of people say to me, Cass, that doesn't make sense. Why would we pay the carers 1075 and pay our seniors 1075? It's not fair. Unfortunately, this is the Home Office for you. We can't. What can we do? It's like banging your head against a brick wall when it comes to the Home Office. Trust me, Martin and I have challenged the Home Office on several occasions over the last 16 years we've been working together. And that's the only way to get through to them, is to legally challenge them. But it makes absolute no sense for them to keep the pay rate exactly the same. But what they would expect when we ask them this, and government officials and politicians, their answer always is, that's the minimum. That's the minimum cash that we're asking for, not this is not what the pay rate is. But as you know, as care providers, 1075 is probably around the rate of what you would normally pay, probably slightly higher than what we pay a carer. But your senior care is around 1150, 1175, maybe £12. So that's their argument. But a lot of my providers who are smaller providers, who are struggling, maybe only have 1 or 2 homes. 1075 is a lot for a carer, but then they can't recruit, so they have no choice. Yes, the pay rate is 1075. It used to be for a 39-hour week, and now the minimum is 37.5. I don't know whether people know that, but presumably your hourly the number of hours is higher. So you're probably on a 40-hour contract or a 42-hour contract anyway, but your minimum is 37.5 for senior carers and carers. The other thing on this issue of pay rates and stuff is the immigration skills charge. Now, everyone in this room will know what the immigration skills charge is, and there's two most important points about the immigration skills charge. Number one, people think it's actually only for people that they're recruiting from overseas. It's a misconception. A lot of my clients and a lot of people that we represent come to us and say, look, why is there a skills charge tax to this UK candidate? Why do we have to pay the skills charge? Actually, the skills charge was implemented in 2016. And the whole premise of the skills charge was to dissuade employers recruiting from outside the UK. So it was put in place. So if you were looking to recruit for a role outside, and you can't find anybody here, then you have to pay for the privilege. However, what our argument is, and certainly Martin and I have been working on this, is that if you've got the skills charge implemented, but these are roles under shortage occupation, which there is no way you can recruit these roles from within the UK, you have to go outside to take these roles. What's the basis of implementing the skills charge? So it should be exempt for the health and care visa. So healthcare providers should not be paying, if you're a small provider, £364 a year, or if you're a medium to large provider, £1,000 a year. And that is the employer's responsibility. You cannot recoup that fee from the migrant. There are other fees you can recoup from a migrant, but you cannot recoup the immigration skills charge. It's a mandatory fee. And if you are caught by the Home Office recouping that fee, is a mandatory revocation of your sponsor license. So you will lose your sponsor license if there's any evidence of immigration skills charge being recouped back by the care provider. And majority, this is obviously common knowledge and migrants are aware, but I can tell you now, because it's happened in practice to me, especially within our line of work as well, is that, staff will be saying, Cash, my migrant has said they'll pay the skills charge, they're happy to pay it. It's not the point that they're happy to pay it. Of course they'll be happy to pay it because they're going to be recruited into a role for 3 or 5 years, and it's going to mean they get a skilled work visa. They're always going to say yes, but you cannot recoup that fee from the migrant. And if the Home Office become aware, we'll lose our license. So that, please, everybody needs to know. And I'm sure you're all aware of this anyway, but it's a point I have stressed in every webinar. Please do not recoup the skills charge back. If you're paying on behalf of the migrant, other fees like legal fees and Home Office fees, that's fine. You can have a relocation agreement and you can put something in place, but certainly for the skills charge, you can't include that. So what we're currently looking at the moment is to have the skills charge removed for the health and care visa, specifically, not everything else, but just the health and care visa, because they're already in the shortage occupations. So therefore, they should not be applicable to the skills charge. But the skills charge, like I said, it's a misconception. It's only for people that come from outside of the UK. It's not. It's for actually people that are already in the UK as well, but in a specific category. So if you have a student working for you on a tier 4 or a student visa, I mean, the rules have changed now in July, so there's another thing I need to mention here. I don't know whether you're aware of that, but previous to July, the students could switch in the middle of their course into a skilled work visa. So if you're employing a student, they could switch in the middle of a course and get a skilled work visa. And those students are exempt from the skills charge. So it's a very attractive offer for migrants and for providers, because they'll be able to fill their roles with people that they don't have to pay a skills charge for. And the other advantage is that they're already working for them. So it's a no-brainer, really. So that's what a lot of providers did. What did the Home Office do? They made an announcement early this year that they were going to change the rules for students and not allow them to come in until they're going to stop that in January 2024. What happens? Middle of July, all of a sudden, HC's statement of changes runs through Parliament, passes it all through, and then we get a notification under the rule change that students can no longer switch as of 3 p.m. on a specific date in July, in the middle of July. And what normally happens is they allow 28 days after the rule change to allow a transitional measure for people to switch, and then it comes in after 28 days. But what the Home Office did on this specific scenario, they said, no, we're doing it from 3 p.m. that day. There's no 28-day window anymore. The government never make it easy for the care sector. And I think what we try to do, even putting senior cares and cares on shortage occupation, one key element I think that is now causing problems for the sector is the anti-modern slavery allegation. And you've probably seen this in the news where you know, certain bad apples within the sector are creating a problem for everybody else because they're not paying the correct pay rate. They're making them work 60, 70 hours a week. They're living in deplorable conditions in accommodation provided by the care provider. So what's happened is the NHS, CQC, and local police are actually turning up unannounced at care homes that have targeted these practices, and then going in and exposing them. But then they're also doing the same thing across really good providers who are in the area. So if you're in a location where there's been allegations of anti-modern slavery and they've actually convicted providers on that basis, then you will get a visit as well, because I've had that with my clients. So they're in the same locality, but they've had the police turn up in a police van, immigration officers and the police out of the blue. And as you can imagine, in the care environment, you know, you're in a very vulnerable position. So you don't want a van skidding around the corner around your care home and the police and the immigration officer jumping out of the van and trying to, allege that this is what's going on. But they're going to go through an interview process, and they spend all day there with the care providers, and then they turn around and say, actually, no, we're absolutely fine, everything's okay here, thank you very much, and then they move on. So one thing that everyone needs to be aware of is this issue of anti-modern slavery, where, and I know it's only a very small number of providers that have unfortunately been caught up in this, but it's something that the Home Office and the government are aware of. So they are targeting care homes and nursing homes across the country and interviewing migrants. So what will happen, and one of the other things that happens on a post-license visit, is that you will get 2 to 3 compliance officers turning up. Now, sometimes what they're doing at the moment, they are simultaneously turning up at the care home as well as the head office of the sponsor. So if your HR is at head office, a compliance officer will turn up at head office, and then simultaneously on the same date and time, 2 compliance officers will turn up one of the care homes. And then what they'll do, they'll ask for the 3 months rotas from the manager. They'll ask for a full staff list, and then they'll interview the migrant workers. And the purpose of interviewing the migrant workers in a 45-minute interview is to make sure that there's no anti-modern slavery issues, and asking them how many hours they work, what's their job role, what's their job duties, how do they get paid, how much do they get paid, do they get annual leave, how's the sponsor treating you, has the sponsor taken money to offer you this sponsorship, you know, how much did you pay, and things like that. So these questions are right at the moment. These are one of the main key elements of interviewing migrant workers to protect their position, and find out also whether they're working the right role as per their costs. That's another reason that they interview these migrant workers. And they will not allow a legal representative or the sponsor or the AO, which is the authorizing officer, or any level 1 user to be in that interview. That has to be conducted in private, and they will insist on that. So they won't allow anyone to be in that interview for that purpose. So that's, I know there's a lot there, and we're at 2:40 nearly. We've still got some time for it, haven't we? So I know we've got a Q&A session, but I'm happy to, if anyone wants to ask a question in between anything that we're discussing, by all means, please feel free to do that. So the element of them coming in for an audit, so HR processes, maintaining migrant contact details, monitoring visa expiry dates, your recruitment practices, and then there's general sponsor duties that they look at as well, which is, does anybody know the number of days that you have to report on the SMS any change of circumstances? Anyone?
Is it Rebecca? Within 10 working days?
Yeah, perfect.
Has that changed, or is that still
yeah,
the same?
it is. It's 10 working days. Absolutely right. 10 working days. Does anybody know what the number of days is for changes in the organization? I.e., you get taken over, you acquire new sites, things like that. What's the timeline for that?
28.
28. It's actually 20 working days, so it's not 20. Far off, but 28 days. But 20 working days is what the timeline is. And if you do get a visit, and then they ask you that question, and you know the answer to that question, you get some good brownie points, because they want you to know the answer to that. They expect you to think, oh, right, 20. I know it's 20 working days for us and 10 working days for the migrants. That'll be good. So they'll know you read Appendix D and the sponsor guidance, and that'll make them very happy. But yeah, that's one of the key areas that they'll ask you. The other thing is that you cannot share your user ID and password with anybody. It has to be secure and only accessible by the authorizing officer or the level 1 user. If they find out that you've shared your password or your login details, your license will mandatorily be revoked. No questions asked. Mandatory revocation of sponsor licensing. There's no representations that we can do or legally challenge that by way of judicial review. Sorry, did someone? I thought someone asked me a question. So that's a mandatory revocation of a sponsor license if you do share. Obviously, you need to set yourself up. I don't know how many, I mean, I presume some of them you have an AO and then you have level 1 users that have separate user IDs. Is that correct? And then you have someone that does your COSs, or you have a legal rep that does your COSs, because legal reps can be level 1 users as well. So there's quite a long process, but they will. And what they have started to do recently, actually, you may not be privy to this, but what they have started looking at is IP addresses. I don't know how the Home Office have got time for this, to be fair. They can't put a process in place where they can record and then translate that recording and put a transcript together at the end of a compliance interview, but they can spend whatever resources they have to check IP addresses of where COSs have been assigned or where sponsor license applications have been submitted. As you know, a sponsor license application can only be submitted by the AO or the level 1 user. You can't be even submitted by a legal rep. So now what they start to do is look at the IP address, and they ask you in the interview, where did you submit your license application and who submitted it? Because they want to check. And if they find out somebody else has submitted the application for you, then it's a mandatory revocation of your sponsor license. I mean, there's a whole array of issues to cover. I mean, we've only got an hour to do all of that. There's so much to cover. I could talk for this all day. There's so many things that need to be covered when you hold a sponsor license, but I'm happy to explain to anybody or give any further information to anyone that needs it in relation to holding a sponsor license, what your sponsor duties are. We have our own online case management system that we run parallel to the sponsor management system. And we actually developed that 16 years maybe now, 15 years ago. When the Home Office got their sponsor licensing unit set up in June, July of 2008, we were aware, and Martin and 3 other CEOs of the largest care association. So you had ECHA at the time back in 2007, and then you had the NCA, the National Care Association. You had RNHA, the Registered Nursing Homes Association. And so some of you may know Frank was there then. We had Sheila Scott for the NCA. We had Martin for ECHA, who's now Care England. And we had one other organisation, I think, and we'd go what we call work permit sector panel meetings every 3 months or so with the Home Office in Sheffield. And there was one time we went there in 2007 and said, oh, we're going to introduce this new point-based system of sponsor licensing. And then in line with that, they said we're going to introduce a new website and a new monitoring system called the Sponsorship Management System. We realized this was going to happen, so we actually took our domain name for our online case management system, which is www.sponsorshipmanagementsystem.co.uk, and the government one is www.sponsorshipmanagementsystem.gov.uk. We actually got our domain name before the government put theirs in. And they were like, how the hell did you get the Sponsorship Management System web domain name? I said, oh, we knew this was going to happen. You see, this is what we've done. So what we've got now is a online case management HR system, which takes all the burden off all 5 areas of compliance. We do all of it as an organization. And I'm happy to speak to anybody about that if anyone needs that help for their ongoing compliance and their sponsor licensing. Some of the other things that I normally cover in a sponsor licensing webinar would also include things like your acquisition of new sites. Sorry, someone got a question? I just heard someone. No? Okay. Sometimes people acquire new sites. So you've got an existing sponsor license, you want to look at acquiring new sites and adding them onto your license. That's a separate process. What we also do as an organization is that we look at what's the most cost-effective way for you to hold a sponsor license. Is it in a holding company? Is it in a separate limited companies? And each has its own advantages and disadvantages. If you have one company that holds a license for all the homes, God forbid you lose the company license, you lose it for everything. If you have separate licenses, then you don't necessarily lose it if you lose one license. So it depends on the corporate structure of the organization, which is what we determine of how is the best way to apply for that sponsor license. A lot of our clients at the moment, some of them have 75, 80 homes, and we're going through a process with one of them now where they're splitting the companies up, and then we're going to get separate licenses for them, because it just protects the organization from, God forbid, anything going wrong and then losing their license. But what I have certainly seen over the last 2 years, previously providers were losing their licenses because they were recruiting roles where they were actually not conducting those roles. For example, you'd have a healthcare advisor sponsored, but they're working as a carer, because we couldn't recruit for carers back in 2 years ago, before 2021, or you couldn't recruit for senior carers. So what some providers are doing when they came to us, when they lost their license, is that they said, oh, we've assigned a cost under this role, but they were still doing those duties, but then we assigned it under this because that's the only one we could do. That's the only way we could recruit people. So it's a common mistake done a lot back in 2016 to around 18 to 20. So there's a massive cull of sponsor licenses in 2015 and 16 and 17, because the Home Office went down and realized that all these people are working as carers, but they're sponsored in a completely different job role. So you had down smooth therapists, you had public relation officers, you had healthcare advisors, but they're all working as senior carers or carers. And the funny thing is, the Home Office, when they granted these COSs, because my clients' arguments when they came to when they lost their license was, well, why did they grant us a COSs, and why did they grant these visas? I said, well, the simple reason for that is because they give you a free rein. They give you free rein to do whatever you want. It's only when they come in for an audit, then they'll pick it up and then they'll take your license away. And sometimes the Home Office are aware. The Home Office was definitely aware back in 2016, 17, that providers were issuing COSs for roles that were not as per their cost. But they give them a free rein to do it, because they knew that we're going to go down and then take these licenses away from them. I know it doesn't make sense, but this is the way that they think, because if you know that you need senior carers and carers and you can't recruit for that role, people knew, the Home Office was well aware of the fact that providers were undertaking this process, but they weren't saying anything. What they should have done is refuse those COSs or ask for further information on the job role, on the job duties, and how this person was qualified to undertake the job role as a healthcare advisor, but they didn't. But there's, like I said, there's so much to cover. I'm conscious of time, and I know I've got some questions that popped up. Fraser, how would I open up the question chat?
So
here we are. I've got it.
Okay.
I've got it here. Right. Okay. Let's just see what question. Can I ask? I think this was HC says. Can I ask why would a care provider give a cost for a skilled worker visa rather than the health and care worker visa? The health and care work visa and the shortage occupation or skilled worker is the same thing. The healthcare visa is a term coined by the Home Office if your position falls under health and care work role, so i.e. nurses, senior carers and carers. So I presume you're all providing costs as carers, senior carers and nurses. So then you'll always fall under the health and care visa. So all the costs are under the health and care visa. There's no separation between the two. It's one thing. I hope that answers your question.
You mentioned before the difference that the health and care visa, you didn't have to pay the immigration health surcharge, but whereas with the other one you do. So you're instantly charged that, or the applicant is instantly charged the immigration health surcharge. So is there a massive difference between the both? Because when you apply for your COSs and you give them the COS, they automatically apply, but they still have to pay their immigration health surcharge.
Yeah, anyone that is not under the health and care visa. So if you say, for example, you're recruiting a role which is, I don't know, account manager, for example, in your organization. Yeah, you run a healthcare company, but you're taking on the role of an account manager. That account manager will come under a different SOC code. So senior carers is 6146, carers is 6145, and nurses are 2231. So those ones fall under the health and care visa, so you're exempt from the health surcharge. And the Home Office fee is lower, so it's 247 as opposed to 730 £37 that you would normally pay. So you get an advantage because you're going into the health and care role. If you're an account manager going into a care company, you don't fall under the health and care visa, and therefore you also don't fall under the short occupation because it's not a shortage role that's been identified by the Migration Advisory Committee in their report. So you're not under a shortage occupation. So you will pay the immigration health surcharge for 2.5 years or 3 years. You'll pay the higher home office fee as well, and you don't fall under the health and care visa. So you will not be you'll not be able to take advantage of that health and care visa. But everyone that applies in a care home, which is in a care role or a nursing role, they will always be exempt from the immigration health surcharge, not to be confused with the immigration skills charge. That's separate.
Yep.
That's
so
separate
even
fee.
if they're applying from overseas or in the UK and they do the 6145 or 6146 codes or the nursing code, none of them will have to pay the immigration health surcharge.
No one pays the immigration health surcharge, not under a health and care visa. No.
Okay, and that's not likely to change because I know that the government said that perhaps they're going to increase those charges soon, and they were going to look at the codes of 6145. Will that change at all? Is there any news on that?
At the moment, the government have already indicated that they're going to increase the skills charge, potentially increase home office fees, and also potentially the immigration health surcharge. If that does happen, the only thing that will affect the health and care visa will be the immigration skills charge and the home office fee.
Yeah.
But if they keep their role within the short occupation, which I think they will do, because the fear for providers last year, running up to February 2023, was, is the carer role going to be removed from the short occupation? Because when Preeti Patel put it in place, she only said it's for 12 months.
That's right.
She said, I'll put this in for 12 months and it'll be reviewed. But we were aware prior to February, towards December last year, that it was not going to be removed from the short occupation list. So we had it for at least another year. Yes, the Home Office are going to review that. And I would love to say to you, Helen, you know what, probably by next February, it's going to be gone. Or we may have it for another year. But I'll tell you now, the government could do anything at any time.
Yeah,
so if they say to us, yes, we're going to review it in February next year, they may review it in November. And then in December, they'll implement it, say, no, they stopped completely. Because they'll do it overnight. They will do it overnight. And they always have done this. So I would always say to all my clients, look, if you're in a position where you're looking to recruit senior carers and carers, get as many as in as you can, because you don't know when they're going to shut the doors on this route. They will shut the doors on this route. I can guarantee you that. The senior carers will be done later, but the carers are definitely going to be taken up at some point in the future. And it's not going to be too long, if I'm being honest. And we will only get notice of it fairly a very short period prior to it going off. So my advice to all my clients is always, do that. I mean, we work with organizations that we provide, because what we try to do, and we've done this with Martin before, we marry our client database with our provider database. So what we do, we cut the recruiter out and we marry the two up and we give candidates for free to providers. We don't charge anything. There's no fee charged to the candidate for any of this sort of recruitment element where we cut out the recruiter. So what happens is that providers get a candidate for free. They don't pay anything for it. We process a skilled work visa application for the migrant. So we do the legal work, which is paid by the migrant, and you get a candidate. And we've been doing that, and it's worked really, really well. And it's something that we're going to be doing another webinar on for international recruitment in the next month or so through Caring, similar to this scenario. This is about sponsored licenses. I've got another one on international recruitment. So we'll be doing another one. But if anyone requires any assistance with staff, senior carers or carers, by all means, please get in touch, and we can get a position whereby there are no fees attached to this, with the exception of obviously the skills charge, if it's applicable.
Yeah, okay.
If it's not, then it's a free candidate.
I just asked one more, I know that there's one more after me, but just about when you were saying that only maybe the authorising officer or the key contact can apply for the licence, and they look at the IP addresses. I've never heard that before. That was quite alarming. So if ours is just about to come up to renewal in December, but you can apply 3 months before, who is able to renew the licence?
I don't mention anywhere. The authorising officer that's on the licence, or a level 1 user. Now, when when you've got your license renewal, what it is, Helen, it's just a click of a button.
Okay.
It says on the left-hand tab of the SMS, it says license renewal. You highlight that, you click it, and then it comes to another page, and then it has 2 fees at the bottom. You populate one of them. One says 536, the other one says 1,476.
I'll go for the 536.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I know MHA going back to when. Oh God, I'm trying to remember the chap's name now. I'm going back about 15 years. 12, 13 years.
I've literally joined in March. So
have you? All right, okay.
From the Foreign Office. So I'm literally like, so
I mean, look, we offer support, but you would click the 1476 and click submit, and then you go through a WorldPay page. You pay it on a debit or credit card, and then what happens is your license is renewed, sort of, not per se, but it's renewed as far as the purposes of the procedural steps. But what the Home Office then do, they do some due diligence behind the doors, and then they check everything, and then they send you a letter about 6 weeks later saying, we're pleased to inform you that your license is renewed.
Okay, thank you.
But it will be renewed automatically as soon as you pay that payment. It's renewed automatically. You continue your staff being employed, issue new costs and things like that.
Thank you. That was my 2, sorry.
Sorry, I'm just going to go back to this list.
Yeah, so Cash, we've got just one more question into the chat, and I think just given the time left in the meeting, I think if we use this as the last question within this webinar session. However, if attendees want to send emails to myself, I can forward all further questions you have afterwards to Cash, and then when we share the recording of the meeting as well as the presentation, I'll put Cash's information on the bottom as well, so that you can also email Cash directly.
Yeah. I've got a question here. It's about the graduate visa. This is a common one that I get all the time. There's a difference, please, because everyone thinks because they're on a graduate visa, they're on a student visa. They're not. Student visa is a tier 4/student switching. So when you look at your tabs, when you're on the SMS and you're assigning the costs, there's a section there which says tier 4 student to skilled work visa, and then you've got this graduate visa. The graduate visa is a visa that has been replaced by the post-work visa, the post-study work visa, the PSW, if some of you may know that term. It's a PSW which has now become a graduate, which means you can work for 2 years without any sponsorship. So if you're on a graduate visa and you're switching to a skilled work visa under the healthcare visa, your ISC is liable, so you have to pay the immigration skills charge. If you're a small sponsor for 3 years, it's going to be 1,291. If you're a large sponsor, it's 3,199 for a 3-year visa to switch that graduate visa to a skilled work visa. They are not exempt, but you can certainly switch them, but it will be a switch in immigration category in the drop down on the list of when you assign the costs. It's not the tier 4 student one, because what happened, the majority of people click the student graduate one, thinking it's the graduate visa, and then they get an email from the immigration skills team saying, oh, you've assigned this cost to this person, but the immigration charge is payable. Can you pay this within 5 days or 7 days, whatever it is? So yeah, that is definitely a switch visa, but it's not the same as a tier 4 student visa. It's different. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time. I appreciate everybody coming on today. Like I said, Fraser's going to share my email address. By all means, any questions, any support, anything you need. Like I said, we've been working with Care England for the last 16 years. So, you know, we're happy to give preferential rates to Care members, Care England members, even non-members, to be fair, but members as well. And we can certainly help and support you as much as we can. Happy to have a meeting or do a pro bono audit or